I wrote this presentation to showcase that I do somewhat know what I'm talking about in the essays and the annotated bibliography. I found that the work that was being done in the classes I attended was directly related to the work I was doing off of it, and that made me very happy. In March, I was learning this aria from La Cenerentola by Rossini, and it's an aria from a character that's usually a basso or basso buffo, which I'm not, a baritone. My teacher took a lot of convincing to allow me to do it, but I really had to. I had heard this aria, I had found it incredibly impressive, and above all, its variety lured me. Because you had deep singing, you had high singing, you had fast, slow singing, you had falsetto, you had recit bits, you could do so much with it. And he mocks, and he laughs, and he gets upset, and I just thought this is such a good endeavor for me in my 4th year at Academy. I'm gonna learn something that's incredibly challenging and it's going to improve me greatly, or so I thought. The aria is Sia qualunque delle figlie. It's a long Rossini aria with incredibly entertaining moments and other very comical ones. It starts like most arias of the time, like I said, slow, decisive, commanding. This is Don Magnifico after all, not a less magnificent tone. After informing us of what he's after, power around the crown, he then starts describing all the hypothetical situations that will come with said power. He talks about sycophants, briberies, nepotism, female interest generated by newly earned power and money, and eventually gets so caught up in his hypothetical world that he is, before having any power, tired or upset at having power. I think it's very funny that he still hasn't gotten it, and he claims to want it, but he's already upset about it. So there's a lot to get through in this aria, so obviously we'll have a lot of text. And one of the sections in particular, the text is incredibly fast singing to emphasize how many responsibilities would come of this hierarchical rise. He says I'd have to tend to the eel fishing, and I'd have to be surrounded by requests and petitions and even candles and sweets and binkies and things made out of vanilla and coffee. It just starts getting ridiculous because he allows himself to get riled up. When executed expertly, it can be very impressive. As I was learning this piece and driving into all the potholes and trees of learning that piece, I sometimes became a bit stuck progress-wise on it. I remember that this fast bit would not work at all. Until I tried doing it as an unvoiced tongue twister beforehand, it would just not work. So I learned it slow and unvoiced. Then I learned it fast and still unvoiced. Then I spoke it fast with as constant airflow as I could muster. Only after that did I finally manage to get through the first half of that passage in one breath. I then had to find a way of having a full breath in a quarter beat without slowing down the aria and sing another equally long and pattery section of music. Time took care of the second half of this section, thankfully. However, what I had not anticipated was that this section was only the beginning of the Rossini crescendo. After this section came a faster and louder section. You know how Rossini does things. However, with slightly longer notes and less text. He's just driving the aria home, basically, and it goes so it's around the passaggio. You never actually go through it, but you're having to jump between it, and it was incredibly difficult to keep sort of the larynx down and the space open, not allowing it to become pushed, and this meant that I would get winded very, very fast. It is still a long Rossini crescendo, it's about a minute long. So after 4 minutes of this high octane singing I was doing, coupled with the exhaustion of singing the fast patter bit right before it, it was a task. Funnily enough, some of the exercises I found in researching for the essay helped me make those jumps more manageable. So Miller says in his book something that I think my teachers tried to tell me for a long time, but probably not in the right words, or they didn't make so much sense to me. My teacher refers to space over the top to help manage this section. So he says you have to keep the space over the top. When you go to the D, you have to keep the space. But to me, that never sort of clicked for whatever reason. To me, that meant that Sorry. My teacher refers to space over the top to help manage this section, exactly. Miller said something along the lines of keeping the space you need for the D before you go down to the A. To me, that meant keeping the same opening in the jaw and the soft palate that I created to reach the D needed to remain the same size for the A. So, keep that, because if you collapse it just a bit, each D gets harder and harder and harder, and you're not making it to the end. It was important that I understood this, as the final section proceeds to do the exact same thing, but instead with octave jumps between the top D and the other one. This produced an entirely new effect for me. When I reached the end of the piece and was asked to sing and hold a D3, I was unable to, which is very weird because it's right smack dab in the middle of the range. So my voice had a phenomenon that I would describe as a car having a hiccup, like it felt like I hit something when I tried to sing the last D, and the song just stopped. So I tried to remember the comments I read on Lamperti's book on breath control, because I remember at the time they were very helpful. And so what he says is that you can definitely not sing a long D3 with the same intensity that you just sing 50 short D4s, because, well, it's different amounts of breath, different desired results. If you do it in the same way, you're not gonna get either of the results. So off I went fixing that section, and eventually, after a fair number of tries, I realized that the same thing that had helped me fix the jump up would help me fix the jump down. See, if the A needs the same space as the D for the jump up to work, then the D3 needs the same as the D4 for the jump down to work. So I found somehow heightened the sound of my D3 and sung it as I would have sung the highest note in my range as far as inner mouth space goes. It worked, I was happy. I then started working on the various coloratura fragments I had left to perfect in the earlier stages of the piece. I tried for a long time to get them to sound legato, since the score gave me ligatures, and clear. They were difficult. Too fast, I couldn't get it to sound clean and at speed. It also sounded almost wrong, even out of character. I did some listening of bassi singing the piece, and there was something they all did. In said coloratura bits, they would add an audible ha sound between each of the notes in the coloratura fragments, sort of like a ha, ha, instead of a ah. I was a bit puzzled by this, because as a baritone, I had been told my whole life that I needed to articulate the coloratura sections without bursts of audible air to separate the notes. That was the really tricky bit, not separating them with air. It so happens that a few days later, I went to a DDP class, and I encountered a comment on one of the PowerPoints that we were showed that mentioned an effect commonly used by basso and bassi and bassi buffi, which was they would add the H sound I mentioned as a means to articulate these sections, because in their case, in their characters, it caused the desirable effect. Because male comical characters, the H would make it sound like they were laughing. Fixed my life. I went into a practice room, I laughed the coloratura away, and by the time I was done, they sounded like the only way they should. The laughing tone it provided to the piece was incredibly effective, and the coloratura became a lot more precise. Well, it's slightly easier to do it when you do ha 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 rather than ah. So my final challenge was getting to my lesson with Giles, thinking I had knocked it out of the park, only for him to tell me it was quite choppy and sectional. I forgot something. See, I had focused so hard on the technical and interpretational aspect of it that I fully discarded the line. No work I had done on legato. Of course it sounded choppy. I was just trying to get as much text across in as little time as possible. Not a good way to go about it. So I remembered what I had learned from Tosi in his book Opinioni dei cantori antichi e moderni. Without breath control, the technique is gone and the interpretation lost. So I relearned the piece as if it were a nice quilter song, you know, those nice long lines and undisturbed nature, very pre-Raphaelite texts. Only only when the Rossini became boring and sort of pointless, 5 minutes of just did I finally re-add the stuff that mess with the overall line. I should also mention that the work I did for the patter section could have been halved if I had started with the legato rather than just going straight to the patter section. So I suppose something else I learned from this was, okay, you like an aria because of something, you want to do it because of that, but maybe choose where to start and how you start. Don't just go straight for what you really want to do, because chances are you're making your life a lot more complicated. Yeah.